Right, we good to go?
Yes. Hi. Good morning, and welcome to Ask the Expert from BC Training. This morning, it's been the launch of the Good Practice Guidelines 2008 at BCI World last month. So this morning, we thought we'd give you an opportunity to have a review of the document. Today's webinar will be presented by Charlie Maclean-Bristol, Director of BC Training and Plan B Consulting. If you'd like to ask Charlie any questions during the webinar, please do so by typing in the question box on the control panel to the right of your screen. The webinar will last a maximum of an hour. Later today, we'll email a copy of the webinar over to you, and the recording will be available on our website, along with all our previous webinars. So today, new GPG 2018. Charlie is a panelist, so I'll hand you over to him.
Right, well, thank you for coming there. I'm hoping someone's going to put my screen up. Share my screen, there we are. So welcome, thank you very much for all attending today. One of the good things about making sure that I did this webinar is I actually had to read the GPG and make sure I've got the gist of it. So thanks so much for coming along. I'm going to try and make this short and sharp today, but I want to give you a sort of general flavor of the GPG and what's new and what's not. Right. There we are. So myself, as Lockie said, that I am a director of BCT, and I'm also the director of Plan B Consulting. Very quickly, my own background, those who don't know me, was in the Army. I worked for a couple of utilities, Anglian Water and Scottish Power, and founded Plan B Consulting 10 years ago, and founded with Lachlan BCT around about 10 years ago. I'm a fellow of the BCI. I've done some education. I started a PhD, but that's I got a couple of years into it and had to finish it, and I had to stop it due to pressures of work, and I've done some awards. So enough of that, let's move on. Right, so what our agenda is this afternoon is to give you a bit of an overview there. And then I want to go through the life cycle. And I put this slightly bit of an opinion, you know, all business continuity people have their own opinion on how business continuity is done. So I'll put a bit of my opinion, but I want to try and stick a little bit to the facts today for business continuity, because actually that's what you really want rather than my opinion on the finer bits of there. So you can see there the new life cycle. It's a bit kind of more process. The graphic is a bit more process orientated, and you can see that embedding is changed to a single word for embedding business continuity. But apart from that, there's absolutely no change in there at all. So that's quite nice and simple. Right, there we are. Go on to the next one. Right, so if you look at the physical document, if you need a physical document, BCT will very kindly sell you one, or if you're a BCI member, you can download it for free, or BCT or the BCI will sell you a PDF version as well. But your first impression, it's exactly the same size as the old one. So that's you know, it's not slimmer, but there's 10,000 words been taken out. So it's I can put more airy. It's a little bit more sort of accessible, and have gone the kind of rather the stock pictures of people looking earnest and looking at tables and chairs and things. And as you can see from here, we have a little bit more of here, these bits here. We've got the that's probably better with a pointer. These bit here, we've got we've got the process, so the process looks more like a process, and we've also got here we got some hints and tips as well. So it's more, it feels more accessible there. The quality is up. The first GPG, the 2031, had to be republished fairly quickly because of typing errors. This one looks a lot error-free, so that's good. I think the important point for all of us, is there is no new sections. So there's nothing on manufacturing, nothing on BC in the oil industry. So it's covering exactly the same ground as the old one do. So if you thought there was going to be more stuff about supply chain or more stuff about working with cyber or some of the more kind of periphery type bits that fit with business continuity, that is not here. It is covering exactly the same ground as the old one did. And as I've spoken, the life cycle is still the same. So we're not going anywhere else in the life cycle until, you know, analysis, design, implementation, validation. So if you're using those terminologies within your own existing business continuity management system, you don't need to change anything. So that's helpful. Now, the main changes according to the BCI, so, and I take these slightly with a pinch of salt, is they say there's great emphasis on collaboration with other disciplines. Yes, there is some cross-reference there, but it's, can I say, almost like slightly half-hearted. There's not a huge amount of how you should collaborate on how to work your crisis management with cyber, or how your IT works with disaster recovery, or there's not a sort of lots of view of how resilience should be implemented. So I think it's getting there, but I don't think there's an awful lot on there. This next bit about the references, supply chain outsource provider, those of you who perhaps on the CBCI course remembering the policy and program management, there was a sort of section which didn't really feel right, was tacked on about supply chain and outsourced providers. Then that has gone. So there's almost less on supply chain and outsourced providers than there was before. I think one of the good things, and we'll come into a little bit more, is this thing about collaboration risk practices. Some of the early writers of the GPG were quite anti that, aligning ourselves with more the ISO 31000 and the sort of risk practices, and now it's come a little bit more into the risk practices of mainstream, and so those of you from sort of risk backgrounds or have a greater understanding of risk will recognize it more. So the emphasis is on risk and threat management, but there's more mainstream risk in here. There's lots of nice references to other documents, mainly ISO documents, as opposed to, you know, there's a great book by Andrew Hiles on this, or a great book by this author on that. Then, you know, there's not that sort of references, but it does have some references to some of the ISO standards. It talks about, so if you want to be really up to date, and this is, you know, you really want to show off that you have read the new GPG, there's this new thing of prioritize activities. Now, the old one talked about maybe time critical process or critical activities. Nowadays, it's very much prioritized. We even dropped the sort of time critical activities, but I think the critical word was difficult to some people because, you know, if you're doing business continuity and you say you're critical, you're non-critical, then kind of it's a sort of saying people are not important. So prioritize activity just means what it does, you know, these are the activities which have the greatest priority. It talks about business continuity in design. It talks about business continuity solutions rather than strategies. making the point there that when businesses talk about their kind of internal strategy, so your internal strategy may be to take over all your competitors and rule the world, that's not business continuity. So it's come up with, whereas in design, it's come up with business continuity solutions rather than the strategies, of which those of you who remember back down to the 2010 version were used strategies. So, you know, if you want to be a purist, you don't talk about strategies, you talk about business continuity solutions. And I quite like this bit, is this idea of a crisis management and incident management distinction. So I'm going to come on to that a little bit later and just do a little bit of explaining what the thoughts are. There's quite a nice glossary in there. And also what I do like, and I've just separated that out because that's not according to the BCI, they've got rid of this overemphasis on tactical, strategic, and operational, which was overused, and it was kind of, it was meaningless and didn't add anything. So we've really gone back to the strategic, tactical, and operational only in plans and in the hierarchy of plans, rather than the trying to shoehorn tactical, strategic, and operational BIAs and things. So getting rid of that seemed to me, it makes it kind of neater and you know, just a bit simpler, that we want to kind of, that's what we're trying to achieve. Right, so coming through to some of just going through the life cycle. I don't know how to, I need to get hold of my Z on that, see if I can erase or drawing. That's it. Right, so program process management, you can see here on the left there is the old GPG 913, and here is the chapters out of the GPG 2018. And you see what here, they've reduced the number of chapters within policy and program management. And I think, again, if you look through it, there's nothing in there that is really very different at all. So, you know, you can read it through. It's probably easier for beginners and people to understand it who are not new to business continuity. But if you're an old hand, you'll be doing it for ages, you don't need to worry about there is anything new in there. They've taken out supply chain outsource activities, as we said, and I like the bit about talking more about skills and competencies. So that's quite useful, and I think that's the sort of area that they're starting to push with the GPG, is making sure that actually you define the competencies for your business continuity coordinators and your sponsors and the different roles within it. So that's an improvement, but I don't think, if you look back through that, there is nothing new for experienced people that you need to worry about in this section. And embedding, as I said, there's a bit more on the competencies there, but there is nothing really, you know, there's a one-liner, the competency of the business continuity manager. I would expect you on that in your business continuity policy or your business continuity operations manual. I would expect you to have a little bit more there. But so they're hinting towards it, but there's no real good checklist you can use. So again, in the embedding, there's nothing particular new that you need to worry about. Right, in analysis, where we had strategic, tactical, and operational and initial BIA, we now still got the initial BIA, but we now have the products and services BIA, the processes BIA, and the activities BIA. So the initial BIA, if you remember from your CBCI training, is all about at the beginning of your process. You might want to do a high level BIA to really understand what the organization, what it consists of, and to define your scope. And you might decide to, if you're a large organization, you might decide to do the scope. You might decide to reduce the scope rather than the whole organization. And then it is a little bit more, I think is a bit more logical here. So products and services is your product you deliver to the customer. It can get, depending on how many products and services you do, if you've got a massive catalog, that can get a bit complicated. But if you've got like 3 or 4 products you provide to them, you can do it at the products and services, BIA, and maybe you do that with your senior managers to say, actually, from a senior manager point of view, how quickly, what is the tolerance for downtime of different products and services? And then your process BIA is looking at the end-to-end process to deliver that services. So it's looking at, you know, from almost like sales to delivery to customer with a manufacturing piece in between. That is looking at that whole end-to-end process. So you may have a number of different processes. You can do your BIA at that level. Or what I think most people do is at the activity level is, you know, you break your organization down to finance and HR and manufacturing, or maybe the different bits within manufacturing, and you do your BIA level. I think it's quite good. I think it is more descriptive and easier to understand the products and services process and activity. I'm still not convinced that there is, it almost still looks like you need to do like 4 different BIAs. And I think in the future, I'm hoping one day to say, look, there is a process for doing a BIA. You can do it at a number of different levels, but you don't need to do, it almost looks like you need to do 3. But that's the new terminology. So you don't want to go and say you're going to do now an operational BIA. You want to go off and say you're going to do an activity BIA. So it gives better clarity. Now, those are beloved of PPRS, people, premises, resources, and suppliers, have now got a longer list. So the longer list, there's resources required. So this is when you're doing your BIA, you're looking at what are the underpinning, and they're called resources. Notice now, these are the resources you need to underpin an activity. So you can see people, buildings, work environments, utilities, facilities, managed consumables. Consumables is a new word which I like, because if you've got a manufacturing process or you've got something that you consume as part of your process, I like that, as opposed to just putting it as a supply or a supplier. So you can see there you've got ICT systems, you've got transportation, finance, partners, and suppliers. Now, what's a little bit annoying is this list and analysis doesn't fit with the same list in design. So that's not so joined up, because I like PPRS because everyone sort of knew it. Here, we've got 2 different lists which have got no natty kind of PPRS to go with it, mnemonic to go with it. But so from that point of view, the resources you acquired are absolutely no different. They've just made a different list of it. In the risk and threat, so it used to be threat assessment or threat analysis, actually, if you want to be truly technical about it. They've now got risk and threat analysis, so they haven't come away from this totally, the sort of threat assessment, but they've gone more mainstream, so more following the requirements of the ISO on risk. And secondly, they have more a traditional risk matrix, as you would expect to find. So as an example of a 3x3 risk matrix, there's an example of one of the tables in there. So if you're a risk person, I think the risk piece has come more mainstream. Whether you were very purist and follow the threat assessment, or whether you just use your kind of normal, more mainstream risk analysis, that was up to you. But I think, you know, it moves closer to the mainstream rather than seeing the risk assessment within, or the threat assessment within business continuity is different from mainstream risk analysis. So that's what you need to know about in analysis. Right. Next one. In implementation, design. Right. The strategies, when we come into design, the strategies, which I'm not allowed to call them main strategies, they're business continuity solutions, the strategies, are the same. So you've got your duplication, your replication, all those. So there hasn't really been anything new in that, apart from insurance has been taken out, which, yeah, that seems to make sense. I think there's a little bit of a trick missed here with using some of the strategies of budge up or displacement. So budge up is getting further density with an existing building, or displacement, you're displacing the less people with less priorities activities, if I can get that right. So those are slightly missing there. So I think that's fine, but the strategies are still the same. I think there are more strategies there, and there's no kind of working from home, or it says work in a remote environment, which doesn't seem to me, you know, so there's no, whereas lots of us can work from home, and that is for a lot of organization, that is their strategy. There's no real mention of it. It talks about remote working. So I think on the mainstream, the strategy is the same, so you don't need to worry about that. What I like is this list here, the more strategies for, and I like the cut. I think the cut is almost better than PPRS. So you've got buildings and work environment, you've got people, information, comms, technology, systems and data, which used to be resources, and resources, you know, you don't normally think as maybe IT naturally as a resource. So I think that system's better. Equipment, consumables, and suppliers. I'm just working with some guys in the cement industry, and one of the things that they pushed is this idea of equipment, because if you've got a large plant, they see that as equipment, even if it's static, as opposed to they don't like buildings is buildings where you sit in an office and do things. So I think they're a bit ahead of the curve here. So we've got equipment here, we've got consumables, which I like, which is supplies before, which was never really really mentioned, and then we got suppliers as well. And suppliers covers your outsourced people as well. So I like that list. That list is better. So you've got a new list there. So you need to forget your PPRS thing. The further considerations used to be tactical options, which was really confusing because it was kind of that tactical options. Well, what does that mean? It's great. Further considerations on our strategies. That seems to make a lot more sense. But again, they're not really. There's no more ones that if you looked at the 13 and 18, there isn't an awful lot of difference for that. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I think one thing they've lost, and maybe someone can tell me if I'm wrong, because I read it relatively quickly, we've lost this idea of a draft RTO, and I rather like this idea in analysis. You draft the RTO, and then when you come into developing your business continuity solutions, if I can get this right, then actually when you start looking at what solutions are available, you may go back and change your RTO, because if you've got somebody who wants a 24-hour recovery, and that to achieve that is going to be very expensive, you need to then look at, actually what we need to do is look at, but 48 hours can be done very easily and at no expense. You might go back to them and say, do you want to pay the money, or do you want to go with the no-cost solution? And they may change the RTO. So I think that's a little nuance I think that's been lost, unless someone can tell me that I missed it. So I'll put up my hand on that one. Threat mitigation measures, yeah, that's fine. That's just changing the threat mitigation, just changing the terminology. But again, there's nothing particularly new there. There's a little bit of consolidation. There's a bit more further explanation and consolidation. But again, concept is not, there's nothing really new within the concept. Moving on to implementation, I think a good thing is the response structure has gone back from the design back into the plans and plan management and the implementation bit. So I think that's that just makes sense. There's no real change in terms of content, but that just makes sense from a GPG point of view. I think this is interesting, this crisis and incident management split, and I think this makes a bit more sense. So what it's saying here is to say there are a certain number of scenarios of which you'll have predetermined plans for. And that is there, and the GPG is calling that more of an incident. So if we lose our head office, we have a work area recovery solution. We've tested that, we've tried it, we know what it is. And so an incident is where our head office burns down and we're going to implement a predetermined strategy to take us to a work area recovery. What is making the distinction in terms of crisis is maybe this is a little bit about the size of the incident, but a crisis is, the key distinction here is about something we don't have a plan or a predetermined strategy for. And it could be a reputation type issue, or it could be an issue like we recovered from one building to another and we didn't think that both buildings could be implemented at the same time, or it's a dirty bomb where it actually means we can't get into both buildings at the same time at all. So I think it's doing a little bit more, is saying there are a number of instances where we're going to have a robust crisis management process which is going to have to make up the solution on the day. And I think that has always happened, but I think it's quite a nice distinction, and it also makes more that you need to have a more robust incident management team, an incident management decision process, which is going to give you a logical sequence for doing the for making sure the recoveries is there. So that's quite, I like that. I think it's light on some stuff like the more social media, the influence of social media, dare I say it, fake news and some of those. Now I know that GPG can't go down to the level of detail there, but I do think those are big influence on the reputation and our plans. So I do think it's maybe a bit light there, but it does mention it, so it's there. In terms of validation, very little changes. The main changes are the names of the incidents, names of the exercises. And I think there just reflects, everyone calls it differently. The one in the GPG 13 was taken from some Scottish, which I put in there, definition of exercises. But everybody calls these different things. So, you know, discussion-based exercise was there before. Scenario exercise is what we would call tabletops. I don't like the word scenario exercise because every exercise has a scenario, but, you know, that may mean more stuff to different people. Simulation exercise is more what I would call a command post, or a kind of more kind of inputs and outputs and more feels live to the people in the room, but it's still in the room. And then your live exercise, your fire practice, or it's the, you know, the big government anti-terrorist exercises when they'll have a plane, they'll stick it full of actors who are terrorists, and they'll get special forces to go and storm it, negotiators, and they play it all for real in real time. So that's your live exercises, and then we got our tests. So there's no real difference in, the only difference is the terminology, and I find with this is everyone calls it different things, and different countries call it different things. So again, I wouldn't particularly worry about changes in the GPG because you probably have your own internal terminology, and you know, if you call your exercises different things, I don't think anyone's going to be particularly worried. So in conclusion, I think GPG2 is better, and I think it's going to be better for learners as well. So I think, and hopefully it's going to be more accessible to people so they don't kind of look at it for help. You know, it's an evolution. rather than a revolution. So it is going there, and it hasn't fundamentally changed anything in business continuity. It's more of a general reshuffle and an update. I think there's a lot of ISOs out there, and there's a lot of ISO detail in there. So if you want to know everything about BIAs, I can't remember what the ISO designation is for the BIAs, but if you want to know everything about BIAs, then go to the ISO. So the sort of detail is there in the ISOs. I always like this. I was having a discussion with James McAllister, who I'm working with today, and he was saying that the BC, there isn't a science to it. You know, all the people who wrote this were, I always call opinionated amateurs. They're people who are out there doing it, who says, look, this works for me, and it feels right, because it works for the people we're working with, it works for the organizations we're working for, and it feels right. But, you know, there's no real science to this. So if you have a particular way of doing it works for you, even if it doesn't fit with a GPG, then, you know, who would you say it's wrong? I think what the advantage is the GPG, it gives you a framework, so it makes sure that nothing is missing. So, you know, you haven't missed off a whole chunk of business continuity, which you should do. But the detail within it really is up to the self. And I think, you know, there's a lot of people got chat about resilience and resilience, where it's going and all the rest of it. It doesn't really assess that bit, yeah. So it's very much saying business continuity is business continuity, and this is the business continuity. There's a few references to other bits, but it's really, you know, this is the core of the business continuity knowledge there. So that is really me. Let's see if I can get this right. So we got a question here, and there's something coming from Patrick, so I'll get Patrick in a second. So this was from Mohammed there, and it was, and I sort of answered, I hoped I answered that with, there isn't a separate crisis management discipline, but I think, and we see it very much from our organization Plan B, is people are cottoning on to that you need to have some instant management skills. Yes, we can have all the predetermined plans, but we'll never have plans for everything. So we do need to have an element of incident management. And managing incidents, you do need to have a framework, and you do need to have some tools and techniques and ways of doing it, rather than just get the incident team together in a room, blank page, right, let's go manage an incident. So I think there's no separate discipline, but I think the world is slightly waking up to this idea is, you know, the whole world is not determined by predetermined plans. There are black swans out there that are going to come at you, and you need to really have the ability to manage the incident, or your planning doesn't fit, you know, fit the incident you're dealing with. So I'm hoping I'm answering that thing, but it's got to be the bit about separate crisis management discipline. No, I think it needs to be integrated, and I'm of the opinion that anything that is adverse to the company ought to be managed with your incident management process or crisis management process. So that can be cyber incidents, that can be maybe takeover or company scandal, it's reputation type issues, it's kidnapping, it's that whole range of issues. You might have different people in the team, but if you've got a robust incident management structure with tools and techniques for managing incident, I think that goes a long way to doing that. So thanks for that, Mr. Mohammed. Right, I've got from Patrick Tomlinson here, generally happy with the refinement to 2012 document, less analysis section, right? I sense that changes made to BICAS constantly are not particularly helpful. Yeah, I kind of slightly agree with him. Is the red pursuing promotion with single generic Airbnb simply applied to the further exam and complex? I think you're absolutely right, and I think you know, I think hopefully for the next GPG that will go there whenever it is. You know, this idea of the 4GPG is promoted by one particular person, and that is their view. And I think I'm not sure that it's really cottoned on, and I think it'll be one of those things that was a good idea, or you know, it's been put out there, but it doesn't really work for the rest of us. So, is there any more questions? I'll just wait a second if there's anything else there. Otherwise, I said I'll try and keep it short and sharp, because I know you're all busy people out there. So unless there's anything, let's just put up the final slide there. So unless there's anything else there, just feel free to email me. You can find me, Charlie Maclean-Bristol. You can, I can't escape, you'll find me on the net there. Feel free to say any views, any thoughts, anything you, any opinions. Always good if someone violently disagrees with me. And thank you for attending, and have a good weekend when it arrives. So thank you very much.
Hi, Charlie. Brilliant. That was genuinely really interesting. So thank you very much for that. Also interested to know that the pizza has arrived in your office.
Oh,
moral of the story is make sure you switch off notifications when doing.
But I couldn't.
But that's good. That shows that you're a real person. Real things happening in your office, which is good. But a really great overview of the GPG, which is fantastic. I hope that everyone's gained much more of an insight into the document than you had before. Thank you to all those that have attended, listened in, and asked questions. We'll be sending out the copy of the webinar as today's bulletin, in case you missed it or missed some of it. From January 2018, all our CBCI GPG courses will be based upon the GPG 2018, so get in touch if you want more information on that. We are delighted to have been chosen to be the first BCI licensed training provider to run this updated course, which is pretty good. If you have any feedback on this webinar or any other topics that you'd like to be covered in the future, drop us a line, reply to any of the emails you receive from us. In the meantime, thank you for joining us. We have a nice weekend, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars. Thank you, and goodbye.